Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's webinar, Nonprofit Life Cycles, Understanding Organizational Capacity. My name is Mark Friesen, and I'm with Vantage. If someone could just pop a note into the question box and indicate that, yes, you can hear me, that would be great, just to give us some reassurance that this is coming through. Terrific. Thank you very much for that. So anybody else, so I do have an indication from some participants that they can hear me loud and clear. If you cannot hear me, then you need to look at either the audio functions in the GoToWebinar box, or simply the speakers, the volume on the speakers on your computer. Hopefully one of those two settings will sort you out so you can hear what's happening. And as I say that, I realize my colleague is going to type that in because obviously the folks suffering from that problem are not going to be able to hear me. So welcome and thank you. A big thank you to everyone for taking time out of your busy days to join us for this webinar. We're quite excited for this session put together in collaboration with Gymnastics British Columbia. The topic for today's webinar is this nonprofit life cycle model, understanding organizational capacity. We are recording this webinar, and Gymnastics BC is going to make the webinar available for members of Gymnastics BC to view afterwards. So you participants today can review the webinar after the fact, and you can also share this with colleagues at your discretion. Before I proceed, just a couple of technical items. There's no webcam, and so don't expect to be able to see me live or any of the other presenters. All you're going to be watching today visually are the slides as we go through this slide deck. So there's no webcam. Also, all the participants in the webinar are muted, and so none of you are able to verbally participate in the presentation this morning. The exception to that is our presenters. So we do have three presenters who will be introducing shortly, and they'll join us for their pieces of this presentation. Just looking, if you have technical questions, please do put those into the question box, and we'll try to sort you out as soon as possible. And also, I'd encourage everyone over the course of the webinar, I've got times during this presentation when I'm hopeful that, or I've allocated time for either myself or the presenters to answer questions, but do feel free to pop those questions into the question box as they occur, and we'll pull those up, endeavor to respond to those questions at those times.
And so she'll be there about 15 minutes. And they'll have access to the presentation.
Okay, apologies for the delay. One of our presenters has just indicated she's not able to verbally join us for her chunk, so she's going to try to get sorted out on her end, and will join us later. But that's not a problem. The individual for whom there's a bit of a problem is not slated until a little bit later on. So sorry for the delay. We'll proceed. So again, if you've got any technical issues, pop them in the question box. We'll do our best to sort those out. I will be posing some questions to the participants this morning as we go through this content, and I'd encourage your answers and feedback on this material, this model that we're going to present this morning. But I do want to flag that if you pop questions into the question box, what I'm looking for is a bit of interactive learning, and so I am going to be sharing those questions with the group. And so most of the questions, I'm going to exert a bit of discretion, but most of the questions I am going to read to the group. And this life cycle model it is targeted, it will bring up issues that are specific to your gymnastics clubs. And so if you have questions that you're not comfortable, or answers to questions that you're not comfortable sharing with this group as part of this webinar, then indicate as much, and maybe consider following up with me via email afterwards, because the questions, I am encouraging answers to questions to read them out to the group so that we can all learn from one another. So Vantage Point, this is our mission. By way of introduction, we convene, connect, and equip not-for-profit leaders through interactive learning. We've got workshops here at our offices in downtown Vancouver. We also do consulting for not-for-profits throughout British Columbia, and in the last couple of years, we've started doing webinars such as this. Most of our learning is oriented towards leadership of not-for-profit organizations, so education and learning for board members and senior management of not-for-profit organizations on a range of topics, including board roles and responsibilities, strategic planning, fund development, volunteer and people engagement, and a whole host of other topics. Today's webinar is sort of the first of a series of learning opportunities that are being provided to member clubs of Gymnastics BC by Gymnastics BC. I'm presuming that all the participants today are pretty familiar with Gymnastics BC, but just a reminder, the mission of GBC: build strong foundations that support gymnastics club success and meaningful participation by all, and this webinar is brought to you by them. So I'm very pleased and excited to, we're very fortunate today to have a range of presenters. You're not only going to be hearing from me, pending the success of our technology, but hopefully we're going to have the benefit and the fortune to hear from these three presenters. So my image is on the left, Mark Friesen with Vantage Point. I'm going to serve as the moderator of today's session, and we'll also be introducing, reviewing the life cycle model for this morning's presentation. But then we're also going to hear from Tracy, Anna, and Anita, and they're going to provide us some sort of their personal experiences, their experiences working in gymnastics clubs, in transitioning through stages, what might be considered experiences that sort of relate to or align with the transitions that are outlined or described in the nonprofit life cycle model. And so they're going to give some sort of real context, some tangible sort of visceral experience of what this stuff looks like in real life, so to speak. So we're very pleased to have them and to be providing a little bit of real life experience by way of context for this webinar. So I'll just introduce them now. Tracy is a level 2 gymnastics coach and spent the first 13 years of her career as a head coach and program director at one of the largest and most successful gymnastics clubs in Canada. After leaving gymnastics, she went to work at the national sport level at Swimming Canada in domestic operations, working on improving clubs all across the country. She's currently working at Diving Canada in the position of high performance coach and club development. In addition to working at Diving Canada, she's a regular professor at a local college, specializing in teaching ethics in sport and recreation and risk management and legal issues in sport. She's also currently the president of White Rock Gymnastics and Diving Academy. We then have Anna Arsenaga, who's a community leader who's been involved in many South Delta organizations, including Delta Farmland and Wildlife Trust, Delta Chamber of Commerce, Business Improvement Association of Tsawwassen, the Delta Hospital Foundation, Reach Child and Youth Development Society, South Delta Leader, and Delta Gymnastics for a number of years. She's worked in many She's worked directly for many committees across the province and in the community of Delta, and has liaised with a whole range of community organizations and developed relationships and networks with a number of corporate and not-for-profit organizations in South Delta for fundraising, sponsorship, events, and business management. She's also initiated and developed new branding, promotional, and marketing campaigns in a variety of community and fundraising events. She's currently, of course, the executive director at Delta Gymnastics and is excited and privileged to be leading the organization into its 40th anniversary. Anita Ott attended BCIT in Burnaby, completing her education in business management, specializing in accounting. She's also been heavily involved in the schools where her kids attended, active in the Parent Advisory Committee as the fundraising chair and the treasurer for seven years. In 2001, she decided to pursue coaching, and after many courses, she's now certified level 2 in women's artistic gymnastics. And since 2007, she's been the director of operations at Okanagan Gymnastics. So we're very fortunate and excited to have these three presenters join us this morning. Tracy is going to provide us with her experience relatively soon. So I'm going to introduce this nonprofit life cycle model, and then pretty quickly after that, we're going to have Tracy relay her experience with White Rock Gymnastics, and then I'm going to go through the model in more significant detail, and while I do that, or in the midst of that, we're going to turn it over to Anna and Anita to also share their experiences. So a big thank you to them for joining us today. Okay, so what's the point of all this? Here are the learning objectives with the outcomes we're hoping to land on. I'm hopeful that participants today will be able to apply the life cycle model to diagnose current capacity and determine future steps to build greater capacity. Secondly, to use the life cycle to identify areas where the organization may be in or out of alignment, which is one of the most important points of emphasis of this model, and I'm hopeful that that point will come across loud and clear through this webinar. And then possibly identifying concrete steps that you can take in your gymnastics club to build your organization's capacity across these dimensions that are listed on the slide. Before I go further, I do want to outline what we mean by capacity, because it can be a bit of a jargony word. By capacity, we at Vantage Point simply mean organizational health. So how healthy, how robust, how resilient is the organization, the basic functioning of the organization. The idea being a healthy organization will better be able to deliver effective, high-performing, innovative programs. And this is an important focus in the not-for-profit sector especially. It's not just an important focus for sport groups or gymnastics clubs, it's for not-for-profit groups across the board, because a lot of us are very good at focusing on and delivering amazing programs, and sometimes a little bit less attention is given to the sort of organizational health supporting those programs that are so important for the communities in which we operate. And so the life cycle model is oriented there to addressing and starting conversations around whether and to what extent our organizations are healthy. The author or developer of this model, her name is Susan Kenny-Stevens, and she's referenced at the bottom of this slide. And she uses the analogy of a table. And so I've got that image up here, and this is meant to convey, when she presented this to us, and in her book that's referenced there, she refers to the tabletop as an organization's programs, right? And so that's what you're looking to achieve, what you're hoping to put out there in the community. But the model is meant to emphasize that a tabletop is supported through like a table legs. And in the life cycle model, there are sort of 4 table legs or dimensions to organizational capacity or health that are emphasized. And so this model is meant to focus and emphasize, we're great at talking about the tabletop, how much time and effort and resources goes into beefing up the table legs that are supporting our programs. And it's often very challenging to allocate resources to the table legs. We're very good again at programs, so it can be a bit more challenging to consider the table legs holding up the organization. So that's a bit of an introduction to what we're getting at with this life cycle model. A couple of key points to emphasize before we launch into the model, these will make more sense as we go through the presentation. The first point is meant to be diagnostic, not deterministic. And so by diagnostic, we simply mean the life cycle model is meant to capture where your organization is at. And that's in contrast to a model or approach that would prescribe specific next steps. And so rather than say, hey, gosh, here's a best practice and everybody in the world needs to adopt this best practice, this model is simply a language to understand where are we? Given our organization's history, given the staff, given the board, given everything going on in our community, where are we in the life cycle of the organization? Secondly, it's not necessarily evolutionary. So it's not meant to be prescribe a series of stages that every organization has to or must go through. It's simply a tool to acknowledge, again, where an organization is at. It's not meant to convey the notion that, gosh, we're in this stage and we need to jump to a different stage. Thirdly, not age or size dependent. So this will make more sense in the coming slides, but a mature organization is not necessarily one that's been around for a long, long time. And vice versa, an organization that has been around for 30, 40 years may not necessarily be in the mature stage. And lastly, it's meant to be holistic. So it's meant to, a robust life cycle conversation or analysis is meant to capture everything going on in and around an organization or a gymnastics club, as the case may be, rather than focusing on one specific, beginning by pinpointing one specific area. The model is really meant to acknowledge everything going on within an organization. The benefits here is, and I'll emphasize here this first bullet point and the last one actually, the power of this tool is giving organizations the vocabulary to understand where they are. And I cannot emphasize how valuable that is, that we've found that for organizations that we work with I'll jump to this last point, in depersonalizing some of the tensions and some of the difficulties that come up for organizations. Often, any organization goes through very difficult transitions of growth, of sometimes decline, all sorts of transitions that can be very difficult. And oftentimes the first assumption of everyone is, it's so-and-so's fault. It's the fault of this person. They're just not the right person for us right now. And obviously personalities play into it, but this model equips everyone involved in an organization to acknowledge, this is nobody's fault. This is just where we're at. We're just making a transition. We're moving from, through a stage of growth to a different stage where our organization has not been previously. And this model is meant as a tool to have that conversation. So the second point here, realizing you're not the only one. So many of the difficulties that we come across are, despite the feelings of those involved in the organizations, they're not always unique. Other folks are having the same growing pains. This is also a vocabulary to talk to others, funders in the community, supporters in the broader community, about where your organization is at. So an honest, frank, blunt picture of where your organization is at to acknowledge the support that would be most valuable for your organization at a given point in time. And also to convey that, especially I think in the gymnastics world, we've really got programs nailed. We're pretty good at that. Where we tend to be a bit challenged are, the table legs, the capacity of the organizations to prop up and support those programs. So this is a language to convey convey the notion that support for those other areas is important. So along those notes, if clubs and participants today are going to take this material and do a sort of a life cycle assessment, it's important to set aside time and really consider whether and how to go about that, given everything going on in your organization right now. This shouldn't be something, going through a sort of a life cycle analysis shouldn't be something that one person takes on their own. It should be a really collaborative effort across a team, pulling from a range of experiences and perspectives on your organization, ideally including board and staff and volunteers, probably even parents, to be completely honest. And so it's, before proceeding, I don't want anybody from after today's webinar to take this and launch forward with a comprehensive survey to members, or to say, yeah, we're doing this, we're going to move to this stage. That's not the intent here at all. If clubs do want to move down that road, to first consider, do we have the space and the time to do this, and who's going to be involved? And this point at the bottom of the slide, to remember, it's not a reflection on anybody involved in the organization. It's simply meant to reflect on where the organization itself is at, and to give a vocabulary around that. So here it is. Here's the model. There's these 7 stages, and I'm going to go through them briefly now and then outline the sort of dimensions or table legs that prop up or underlie this model: idea, startup, growth, maturity, decline, turnaround, and terminal. The intent here is, the notion is that capacity building programs that don't start with this kind of diagnosis run the risk of assuming that all organizations are in the same place or starting from the same place. And you know what? Not every society, not every gymnastics club is ready to do a comprehensive board governance review or board recruitment process, or to recruit specialized staff with specific, or administrative staff with specific skills, or an executive director with a business background. Not all organizations are in that stage. By the same token, some organizations absolutely are, and some of those things I just outlined absolutely are the most important next step for an organization. And there's no right or wrong answer. This is just a model to convey and acknowledge where you're at, and to try to outline, okay, for us in our organization, rather than adopt a one-size-fits-all approach, for us right now, it's more important to address, X. Board development or board recruitment, or not, or something to do with management or the organizational structure of the gymnastics club. I already mentioned it's not deterministic, so these stages don't have to be in order. I mean, it is a nice smooth curve, but the intent here isn't to suggest, oh gosh, we're in startup, we need to slide up this curve, go through growth, and go through to maturity and decline. In fact, organizations can jump. You don't necessarily proceed smoothly from one stage to the other. An organization can start from startup and can go right to terminal, or it can go through growth in a period of a year or 6 months and jump immediately to maturity, or it can be in a stage of growth for 30 to 40 years even. So I just highlight that by way of emphasis because this curve at first glance does appear to be a bit of an evolutionary curve with a smooth progress, and the lived experience of organizations going through this is not evolutionary or smooth. So just to go through these quickly, it starts with the founding idea stage, in which some cases, sometimes that converts into a startup, or it might immediately move into the terminal stage. So someone has an idea and they proceed to launch an organization. Having started, some organizations then move into the growth stage, while other organizations can remain in the startup stage or idea stage for a long time. Organizations that do master the multiple challenges of the growth stage will eventually become mature, and we'll go through what the characteristics of a mature organizations are, although they may stall in the growth stage. And I've certainly worked in, and I'm sure some of you are thinking right now, yeah, we're definitely in the growth stage and we've been here for a long time. And because the mature stage in this model, you know, it's a flatter curve, it's a bit smoother. So the idea there is that the operation is a bit more turnkey at that stage, whereas growth is characterized by still a bit of scrambling. Everyone's still scrambling around trying to keep up with the high number of programs and participants and the demand for programs that are out there in the community. Mature organizations do, however, need to maintain an active community connection in order to stay vibrant. Those that don't will slip into decline stage. So the decline is meant to depict organizations that really lose touch with what the community wants and what the community is after, what clients and participants, what program participants are after, and participants start to move away or go to competitors. And organizations that don't acknowledge that explicitly are definitely in a decline stage. And from there, organizations, you know, can affect a turnaround. And so if there's a group that identifies that and is willing to make significant changes, they can affect a turnaround and ideally jump back to the beginning of the growth stage. But organizations that aren't successful in the later stages of decline, that aren't able to affect that turnaround, do slide into terminal. And sometimes the decision to close doors is an explicit one. We've worked with organizations that make an explicit decision, say, you know what, this organization has had its time. There's other folks doing this or doing different things, or there's a different demand in the program and the community, pardon me, for different types of programs. So we're going to close our doors. The upside to this is, I mean, there's 4 stages here where organizations are very robust, where there's a lot of excitement going on, and where organizations are very much connected and in touch with what the community wants. There are, however, these 3 stages where organizations are going through very difficult either transitions or are simply not acknowledging some of the difficulties that they're beginning to face. So having sort of taken a broad look at the life cycle model overall, this now gets broken down, each of these 7 stages now gets broken down into these dimensions at the bottom, underneath this curve. And I'm going to focus specifically on the bottom 4. So these bottom 4 are meant as the table legs, if you think back to that image I brought up previously. The management table leg, the governance table leg, the financial resources table leg, and the administrative table leg. Over the course of the presentation, we're going to explore these in a little bit of depth. But what you'll see here is that actually an organization can be at different stages across different dimensions. So programs may be at a higher stage of growth or approaching maturity, whereas, you can see here the example, the governance, the administrative systems are further back. In fact, the governance is sort of, their structure is set up in a bit of a startup mode, right? And then the financial resources, while are still in the growth stage, are at a different point, an earlier stage of growth than where the programs have arrived. And so again, the point of this model is not to convey the notion that, gosh, if you're in the startup stage, you're sure in trouble and you need to jump to the next stage as soon as possible. The notion is to acknowledge, okay, where is your club? Like, where are you? Let's just start an honest conversation across the board, across the staff, with all the coaches to acknowledge where we are, and to depersonalize any tensions or difficulties that are coming up. Just acknowledge, this is just a growing pain. We're making a transition right now. Things are changing around here. And in acknowledging that, to recognize, okay, where is it that we're out of alignment? So what items are further back or in a different stage than our programs or than our management, right? I'm going to jump to this next slide. You see here, this is a more extreme example. Programs and management have advanced into the growth stage, but governance, financial resources, and administrative systems are way back in the middle of the startup stage. And so the notion here, and I introduced the notion of what we mean by capacity or organizational health. The notion is here is if an organization is out of alignment, so if the governance structures and processes and the functioning of the board is not in the same stage, is not in the same stage of development as the programs of an organization, you're not operating at optimal capacity. Your capacity to deliver programs effectively is somewhat limited. There's a constraint. There's a constraint there. So with whatever stage you're in, acknowledging, gosh, are we in alignment? Is everything up to snuff? And I mean, this is a common one, I think, for gymnastics clubs. Programs and management advancing, professional coaches doing a great job delivering amazing programs, where administrative systems, infrastructure, the support, the background work, barely hanging on, to be honest. And we're going to hear some stories along those lines, I think, soon. So what I'd like you to do now, I'd like everyone, just consider for a moment, without considering these table legs. So just overall, maybe think about it. Write down on a piece of paper in front of you, where is your club? Where are you? Is it a very recent startup club that's just trying to get off the ground? Or are you seeing really fast and heavy growth, a lot of demand in the community for your programs, wait lists for all the classes, requests every week for different types of programs, for new types of classes, for another inter-club group, for a whole range of programs? Or are you confident, you're in a mature stage, but then consider, okay, if the club's in a mature stage, are there any of these table legs that are maybe further back? So I'm going to pause there for a moment and give you a chance just to write down on a piece of paper, overall, where do you think your club is at? Okay, I'd now like to ask, and it's totally up to you if you're comfortable sharing this with the group, not necessarily the stage your club is in, but if you've identified the stage your club is in, is there one of these dimensions where, gosh, it's just totally out of alignment? Like, gosh, from a financial resources standpoint, that dot is just way back, way further behind, or in a completely different stage than our club is overall. And if there is, what is that dimension? Is it the administrative systems, the financial resources, governance, or management? So if you're comfortable sharing, if you could pop that into the question box, then I'd like to have a look at that. So someone shared here, financial resources is in a different stage, a different stage than possibly the club overall or the other dimensions. Somebody's indicated they feel their organization is in a state of maturity. For somebody else, it's administrative systems that are in a different stage. So that's great. Thank you for that. And I'd encourage everyone else, give that some consideration, some initial thought. And you're going to be better placed to do that after we get through this webinar and go through this model in more detail. But that's sort of a first stab to kind of consider how this model relates to your organization. Okay, so I'd like to now, I'm going to, as soon as I introduce her, mute myself and turn it over to Tracy. Tracy's had a pretty unique and interesting experience with actually a whole bunch of clubs, but she's going to provide us with one story today. And when she's done, she's going to give an outline of that experience, and I'd ask everyone to kind of consider how that experience relates to this life cycle model, the overview that I've just provided. And when she's done, I'm going to give a couple of moments for questions to Tracy, and then she's going to have to leave for the day. She's in Ottawa, so she's a bunch of hours ahead. So yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy. And again, Tracy, the president of White Rock Gymnastics and Diving Academy. So hang on just a moment while I set Tracy up for success here.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well enough.
Tracy, you're on.
I'm Tracy from White Rock Gymnastics and Diving Academy, and I'm here to share with you some experience I've had in sport, and specifically gymnastics. And the topic that I have is the one area in the not-for-profit life cycle that is probably the one that's not spoken about very much. It's the decline, turnaround, or terminal part of the cycle. And I've worked a lot in this area, both as a coach. I was in a club that had a ton of success, kids going to the Olympics, and 2,500 members. And in that same year, we almost had to close our doors, which is almost unheard of and crazy to even think about. And the amount of work that it took for us to get out of that situation was insane. And when I left sort of the full-time coaching path and went to more of a national sport organization administrative role, I found that it was one of those things that if a club was in trouble, they didn't really reach out and ask anybody until it was in this stage, in the decline stage, and that's usually when I got a call. So that's where a lot of my experience lies. And a lot of times clubs don't reach out because it's embarrassing to reach out for help. They think they're the only ones. But I'm really happy to talk about it because I think this starts off in maybe a couple areas in a club, and then it can quickly spread if you don't really realize what's happening, which is what happened when I was coaching full-time in a club. So I'm hoping that this can help people, and this started for me with White Rock in 2012. We have two sides to our facility, so we have a diving and a gymnastics side, and the diving side of the facility reached out for help, and what they asked me was, could I come and help get them organized? So I thought, okay, I'll come out there. I didn't really know what I was into. I actually thought that it was to help them get organized, but so I went out there and spent a few hours in the office, and after being in the office, I realized that there were some major issues. So it was just the end of August, beginning of, registration was in full swing for the fall, and I realized that everything's really disorganized. There's no real systems. There's a lack of procedure. It actually, as an organized person, really stressed me out to be in that office. There was some confusion. Coaches were trying to do everything. And when I peeled back a few more layers, I also realized that there was a non-functional and non-existent board and a ton of disorganization. So I thought, oh my goodness, this is not an organizational trip. This is more of we need to do something quickly. That kind of disorganization, that can't last for long. I didn't know how long they had been in this state, but I did know that they probably had less than 2 months to sort of keep the doors open. So when I go to help a club, the first thing I do, and when I know that they're in this sort of real decline situation, is I take a very broad look at their overall operations. So here I'm not digging too deep. I really just want to scratch the surface of a few areas. And I really want to see what kind of risks there might be and what really needs to be addressed today. Because when staff are working in a decline stage, not only is there confusion and disorganization, there's a lot of other things, low morale. It's a real firefighting stage. So I've got a few things that I've got in a bit of a list here that I can share with you. But I want you to know that even though I'm listing it, it's not really something that I do in order, because in this particular situation, there was a lot of balls in the air. So it was really just about starting or establishing a starting point. So a lot of this I was doing concurrently, and it's a bit of a juggling act. And in the beginning, I was on my own, but we all know that that doesn't last for long either. So the first thing that I did was I took stock of what we have, and I sort of looked around at, okay, what needs to be controlled? So the first thing that I knew needed to be controlled was the fact that we had registrations coming in, and the office was just a complete mess. So I put some immediate controls in place in the office. So really concerned about, my intake, my revenue. So making sure that there's a very basic registration procedure, getting that really organized, and establishing somebody to be in that office as the first point of contact. So even though we really couldn't afford somebody, I put somebody in there anyway, because if you don't have any revenue, you don't really have a club anyway. So That was the first thing that I did, was really take control of that front office. And you know, parents deserve organization and information and proper registration. So I wanted to make sure that whatever was coming in was being recorded accurately, and putting a friendly face at the front was key. So even though the office looks very differently today and it operates, that was my starting point, and I can assure you that it was not an overnight success. It was just an ongoing, growing pain that we dealt with, but that was one of the first things that I did. The next thing that I did, or at the same time of, was I did a quick HR review. So I wanted to know who was taking care of these kids. Very, very important. Who's on the floor with them, and set some basic standards. So luckily enough for me, I have a technical background, so I am able to look at it and say, oh, okay, something's not right there, or let me check on the qualifications. And I would encourage you that if you don't know, that there are definitely, you know, you can call GBC, you can call the Coaching Association of Canada. There's help out there. So, you know, when I've worked with other sports, that was something that I've had to do as well. But so what I did in terms of HR was, okay, I have the registration coming in. I know there's kids coming in September. I needed to make sure that those coaches would be there. Because I don't know them, I don't know that they'll show up. And I don't know that they'll do a good job. So what I did was I immediately implemented some coaching standards. This is all very basic. You know, no cell phones on the floor, staff shirt, please. One of the more important things I do at this point is implement a casual employment contract. So they had nothing. There was no employment contracts at all. So even for my hourly kids that come in and teach rec, it's just a one-page, here's the fall session, here's the hours I'm giving you, and I put an end date on that. And I can't tell you how good that was in every sense, to have that end date, because you can always add sessions in. You did a great job, we're bringing you back for fall. You did a great job, we're bringing you in for birthday parties. But if somebody wasn't doing a good job, it was great to have that end date. So I did that. It was just really, really basic. Here's what we're deducting. Here's how you get paid. Here's when you get paid. But it also made them feel like, oh, okay, this is a real job here. So even if there was, I didn't want to look back. I don't know what they had. They didn't have much. I just was like, today, this is what's going to happen. And also for the full-time staff, I did implement one-year contracts with them. And I also set up just some really basic responsibilities and expectations for everybody. So not really a job description, but just a one page of expectations. The next thing that I did, or in concurrent with, was I immediately relieved those that were harming the business. So you don't always have to do this, but if you are in that, if you find yourself in a situation where somebody is just not the right job for them, then it's just not the right job for them, and that's okay. And it just may be that they were there because they needed somebody. So I don't know what any recruiting process had taken place, but this was, you know, we did it properly, we did it within the law, and it's one of those really hard things to do, but if you have to do it, then you have to do it. And then sort of the last thing that I do in this just scratching the surface part of sort of understanding the business and where we are is communication. And I say that communicate, but to a certain degree, and here's why. Generally, my speeches are all about transparency, but at this point, everybody knows things are bad. There's no elephant in the room. They just don't know how bad. And so for staff, that's a really hard place to work in. And I felt bad for them because it wasn't really their fault. They didn't really have a lot to do with this decline. They are just in this situation because they were. So I took the approach, right or wrong, that this really wasn't a time for complete transparency because they didn't really need to know all of the gory details behind the scenes. And I felt they were already stressed enough, and I felt like it would cause them even more undue stress. So what I did was I answered any questions they had honestly. I kept information really basic, and this was also a bit of damage control too for morale. And within this communication piece where I was talking to the staff a lot, and I also reached out to GBC, because if you're in a decline stage, there's probably you're probably in hot water with your provincial section. So I didn't know if that was the case, but I did reach out and just say, listen, I don't know how they did registration, I don't know what's gone on, but here's who I am, here's my background, I acknowledge that this club has not been organized, I'm here to reassure you that things will get better, and I put a plan in place to do that. So they were very great about supporting me and answering my questions, and sometimes I called them multiple times a day, and I got to know a lot of the people in the office. So I would say that, you know, reach out. There's help out there for you in this communication piece. But that was really important to me. So once you sort of scratch the surface there, and that's just sort of maybe the first couple weeks that you're trying to figure out what to do, my number one priority was get the coaches back to coaching. In a decline stage or a terminal stage, everyone is doing everything for everybody, and they're likely not doing a great job of it. So the head coaches were doing a bit of petty cash, and they were doing a bit of payroll stuff, and they were marketing, and they were doing everything except the one thing that they were hired to do. So, and that's just a nature of being in the decline stage. Everyone goes into survival mode. So this is where I was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Even if you're not sure that this is the team that will be with you long term, it's who I had. So I didn't want to just come in and go, everybody's out, because I didn't know them. And that's a real knee-jerk reaction. Sometimes it is the right thing to do if there's certain situations in place, but I really wanted to evaluate what's the cost of keeping this person or these people. Like, so unless I had severe safety concerns or there might be some questionable ethics involved, everybody was stayed on board until I knew enough about them. And I have to say that a lot of times when I go into a club, it's not usually that it's the wrong person. It's usually the wrong person or the right person in the wrong position. So that's fair. So we give everybody sort of time to just get back to what their real job was. I did not, at this point, still even worry about actual job descriptions, but I just worried about qualifications. So were they okay to be on floor? Were there gaps in their professional development? Where could we support them? Where could we help them? The next thing I did with the coaches was that I made sure that I relieved them of all their other duties except what they should be doing. So their number one focus was the kids from this day forward. And that was actually a big relief to them, and that actually improved the morale in the gym as well. They had a lot of relief when we said, you just have to coach. And as corny as it may sound, when I sat down with the coaches, you know, I wanted to not just relieve them, but also, you know, put some positivity into the place. And I really just said to them, I just need you to come in every day and do your job with consistent excellence. And it's no more complicated than that. And I said it over and over again, because they had been doing so much for so long that they didn't even know anymore what their job was. And lastly, serve the kids that are there. These kids and parents have been through disorganization. They've weathered this storm, so please do your absolute best to give them a great year. So from an HR standpoint, a staffing, coaching standpoint, that's what I did. The next thing I looked at was compliancy. Okay, so where are we really dropping the ball here? If the coaches are qualified, are we compliant with GBC? How's our reporting? How's our registration? These are simple systems that if they're not in place is not good for the organization. So part of reaching out to GBC was to understand and educate myself what they needed from us and to make sure that going forward we were compliant. So there's a whole compliancy issue here. And we also looked at compliancy in terms of our not-for-profit status as well. We didn't have a very well-functioning or existent board at that time. So that was another piece of the compliancy. And the last thing that I did, and Mark touched on this, is you can't do it alone. So the board that we had, I couldn't even reach them, didn't even know who they were. So we brought in a new board, and I really lack experience in certain areas, so it was really important for me to target people that had skills that I didn't. And I really wanted a mix of parent and community members. I have no real vested interest in that club. I don't have kids there. There's nothing in it for me other than I love gymnastics and I love clubs to thrive. So for me, it wasn't, I'm not a parent. I did find one parent who found another parent, and then by asking around, we found a couple really fantastic community members who were retired and had a bit of time but had great skill sets. So that was the team going forward. So from here on in, it was myself and this great functioning board. And that's the hardest time to recruit a board, is when you're in a crisis. Like how difficult is it to say, yeah, we're in a real mess, but you have skills that I don't, and I really need you. So it was real honest with them. And it is a tough sell. So I mentioned that I brought the parents on, a couple community members, and you know, one of the things, I work a lot with boards in clubs, and because we were really starting from scratch, we started from a very basic place, and it's a place that I remind clubs of all the time, and that is, you know, we're not going to hit a home run every time here. We're going to have to try a few things, and we as a group have to understand that we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay, but we will make it better. But our main goal always has and will continue to be that our job when we leave is to leave this club in a better place than we received it. And I think if you go forward with that sort of mindset, regardless if you're a parent or a non-parent, leaving the club in a better place than you received it, you can't go wrong. So that's where we started from. Really basic, almost from, okay, we're declining, we're starting over. There's no systems in place that we carried over. Everything started from scratch. So what worked well for us? Well, it's easy to jump to a lot of conclusions when you're in a decline stage. So it wasn't a time for a lot of digging and forensic accounting, no strategic planning session. There was time for analysis later. What we dealt with were the things that mattered most: the kids, the coaches, the qualifications, the compliancy, the systems, and the processes. So in that, we got policies and procedures together. So there wasn't much in terms of policy and procedure, but it was not just developing it, but teaching the staff then how we do things. And we created an operations binder. So this is a living, breathing document that we have. It's got all our policies and procedures in it. It clearly describes how we do things, because our intent, you know, especially mine, isn't to be a president of White Rock Gymnastics forever, but to be able to hand something over to the next president and say, here you go, this is the way that we do business. So we have everything in there, from our registration, our office procedures, any equipment contracts. This is a living, breathing document that's updated all the time. The basic procedures that we implemented right away were registration, petty cash, expense reporting, payroll procedures, very basic membership management. I've seen a lot of really fancy volunteer member management systems. Ours was very basic. It just did the job. And some basic HR functions. So from there, we've got the basics, we started getting things under control, and then we really moved on to what I call more sustainable systems. So after those very basic controls, the friendly greeting at the front, the consistent messaging, the coaches they could count on, we moved to more sophisticated systems. So some of the things that were very basic we kept because they served our needs and we didn't need to recreate the wheel, but other things needed to be improved. So we improved then payroll, registration, We also started something which is pretty interesting called an inventory of work. And it's nothing more complicated than an Excel spreadsheet that we just brainstormed every single job that had to be done in the gym. Because we didn't really know what the coaches were doing, and the coaches were finding it hard to articulate everything they did. So we started this master sheet of an inventory of work. It could be everything that the board did too. And then we started separating things out. Okay, well, this looks like the lead person should be doing this. And there was always a lead and a support for each sort of job function. And that's how we built our job descriptions going forward. And what's happened with that is now that the gym has sort of evolved a little bit out of the decline stage and we're really moving along well, now that we're seeing that the tasks that the staff are doing are also changing. And what we're doing as a board has also changed. So now we're, that inventory of work looks very different. So now we're into a reorganization of the stuff we just did 2 years ago. But that's how we're moving along. So that was really it was something so basic that we just did as a group and we continue to work on. So it's called an inventory of work. Other things that we improved and started developing was more different hiring practices, putting something standard in place. We implemented a wage grid. We started evaluating staff. So these are all, you'll notice in some of the columns and the lines that Mark had, some of these things fall under management systems. Some of these fall under administrative systems. We fully implemented job descriptions, researched professional development opportunities. Everybody has a contract that works with us. We have no independent contractors. We also did a full quality review of programs. So do we need the programs we have? What value do they bring? What's the cost of running that program? Is it worth it? And on the flip side, what do we need more of? What are we doing really well in? What are the members demanding? So now we're getting into, okay, we know what we're doing well. That's what we should do more of. We've also done athlete development pathways on the programming side. So how do kids actually move through our gym? How do they get from the kinder gym all the way through to a provincial athlete? So those are some of the more sophisticated systems that we really spent a lot of time in. And then one of the things Mark asked me to talk about was some of the obstacles or challenges. So some of the big challenges in implementing any kind of change, it doesn't have to be a full, complete change like we did. It could be just a smaller change, is an alignment. And we did a lot of alignment between 2012 and 2014. During that time, there's a lot of balls in the air. There's a lot of firefighting going on. It's a drain. It's a drain on your volunteers. It's a drain on the staff. But my advice in that stage is really spread the work around and draw on people's talents. So that was a bit of an obstacle. We've moved out of that now, and we're now we've really shifted gears into a refocused sort of position. So it's nice to be out of that, that's for sure.
And Tracy, if I can stop you there for a moment, because you've provided a lot of context and material, and I want I do want to turn it over to see if there's any questions out there with some of the items you raised, because you raised a lot of dimensions, and I just wanted to actually pick up and emphasize. I'm quite excited at this, and specifically where you started. And to emphasize, from my perspective, the steps that you outlined where you started with White Rock Gymnastics would definitely be considered under the the management dimension, and then also the administrative systems. And I mean, I love the description of, rather than focusing on very specific job descriptions, just realizing, we're not there right now. And so right now it's more important just to have basic expectations for coaches, and to clarify that they're going to focus solely on excellent, delivering excellent programs for kids, and to remove other responsibilities, as opposed to trying to immediately implement, really sophisticated HR systems with very specific, specialized job descriptions. And then your outline of the kind of the same approach to board members, to be honest and frank and say, we're in a difficult place right now. We need a specific specific type of board member. And I bring that up because sometimes organizations say, gosh, it would really be great to get board members with a lot of connections in the community or high profile individual, a board member who's also on the board of Van City or Coast Capital Savings or something. And that type of board member will not always serve well depending on where an organization is at. And so I think that's incredibly valuable, those sort of, describing where you'd started. I'd actually challenge and consider, and I know this is the case with everybody listening in right now. I know that there's a task or something pressing that would be a good step, a good project to undertake, but you don't feel you can afford it, or you don't feel there's somebody with the time to do it. And I bring that up, Tracy, because you mentioned hiring an administrative support person, even though you didn't really have the budget for it, but realizing that without that, just recognizing that was one of the most important steps to take. And I know everyone listening in, has a project or something like that they've, not proceeded to do because of a lack of resources. And I challenge everyone to consider, God, if it's really important, maybe, make the leap and make that item happen if it's really holding the club, the club back. So I'd like to, I'll give everybody sort of 30 seconds if anybody has any questions for Tracy to pop them into the question box.
I promise I'm almost done, Mark.
No, and I just wanted to, before you get going, I wanted to highlight those couple points because those were great. Emphasis exactly what we're talking about, right? Is acknowledging where an organization is at and not trying to, do a forensic analysis or do strategic planning when it's not the best step for an organization, immediately kind of thing, right? So, okay, Tracy, I'll give you 2 more minutes. There's no questions in here, so keep going.
Okay. Just finishing up with the challenges. So the last few challenges that we had was buy-in from staff. So in the beginning, everybody was like, yeah, we're going to have some rules, we're going to have some procedures, but that said, it's really hard to implement change and put in controls and procedures to people who never had any. So all of a sudden, they were faced with all these rules, and oh, here comes Tracy, and she's got all these things we have to do. So we moved from no accountability to quite high accountability. So that was a real change and a real challenge in the beginning. My last challenge in the change or transition, it was building a new team. So a lot of people that we had either liked the change, they didn't like the change, we lost some people, we gained some people. And you know what, that is just the nature of change. Some people can handle it, some people can't. But we set out to make the gym be attractive to coaches, and we were successful in hiring a head coach from outside the province. That would be a piece of advice. If you're looking for a coach, you have to make sure that the kind of coach that you want, you're actually ready to receive them. Because if coaches are, especially in gymnastics, are very professional, and there's a certain caliber of professionalism that there is expected. So I knew, and our board knew, that we had to have our ducks in a row for sure. And the hardest thing, I think, was really that balance of being tough, being sensitive, and standing our ground. Because there were times when we got a lot of pushback from parents, we got sometimes pushback from staff, but we really didn't want anyone to interfere with the integrity of what we were trying to do. We knew as a group where we wanted to be in 3 years, and we got there in 2. So I would challenge you that as tough as change is, if you know where you want to be, stand your ground, do it with some, sensitivity and delicateness, but at the same time, never let anyone interfere with the integrity of what you're trying to do. Because I knew what we were trying to do would ultimately benefit kids and athletes, and at the end of the day, that's what matters. So
that's great, Tracy. I love the notion of standing your ground. We do have a couple of questions. There's one that pertains to strategic planning, and Christina, I've written that down, and I'm gonna table that till the end. Someone else, though, has asked, could you expand on how you created higher accountability? And then somebody else asking specific details on how to move from no accountability to some or lots. So I don't know if you have further insight there, Tracy, in making that move to more accountability.
Sure. So that sort of manifested itself in a lot of different areas. So without having a job description, and having sort of a new board come in, there's a lot of, well, that's just how we do things. That's just what happens here. And I'm wearing my board hat, and I'm thinking, no, that's not it. And in fact, we didn't ask them for any kind of report. So in terms of accountability, it wasn't we require a report for every board meeting. In fact, we didn't ask them for anything like that. The accountability really came in terms of, these are the standards that we expect in the gym. This is the level of professionalism. We expect you to communicate properly. We expect you to act like a professional. And as a technical leader, I expect you to model that. Because whatever happens at the top, good or bad, does filter down. So we went from a lot of coaches that really just did what they want. And I don't mean in terms of programming. I will not interfere with a coach's program. I will interfere in everything else but. So administratively, how payroll was done. Let me think what else it was. Now we're at a point where everything is automatic. So we're not recreating anything year to year. We know at this time of year, this is when we're doing tryouts. This is when the calendar gets updated. This is when we do a planning session. So it really rolls now month to month, and we never really have to recreate anything anymore. I'm sure more of this is going to come to me afterwards. But if anybody wants to talk about anything afterwards, that's fine too.
And actually, that's a good point. I've not provided the contact information for the presenters today, but I do have my email at the end of this. And of course, the folks at Gymnastics BC have contact information for all the presenters. So any of you have specific questions that you want to reach out to Tracy or or Anna or Anita afterwards, definitely pop either myself or someone at Gymnastics BC a note, and I'm sure we can make that connection. So that's great, Tracy. There are a couple of more questions, but I think I'm going to leave them to the end, and in the interest of time, move along forward. And Tracy, I know you do have to go, but you're obviously welcome to stay on as long as you're able.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you've given. I think you've given everybody a lot to think about.
Great. Thanks very much.
Okay, so continuing on with a more in-depth look at this model, we're going to go through these stages and look at them in detail, and then we're going to, and very very shortly, we're going to hear from both Anita and Anna. And what you were hearing from Tracy was identifying, she mentioned starting with the basics, and she definitely landed on some immediate next steps that she needed to tackle to keep the organization afloat when she came on board. And an initial stab, I just prod everyone to consider and emphasize that, again, it's not meant to prescribe your organization should immediately jump to a different stage, but every stage does have pros, but there are on the flip side cons to every stage in the life cycle model. So we're going to go through these stages a little more in depth and quickly, and I'm going to do so and explain the different characteristics across these different dimensions at each stage. Some of them I'm going to go through very quickly because I don't think they might be super relevant for everyone today. I'm kind of assuming, maybe incorrectly, but I may be assuming that most clubs and participants in today's webinar are probably not in the idea or startup stage, you're probably in different stages. So I'm going to skip through some of these pretty quickly, but any of these stages, definitely follow up afterwards if you have specific questions. So idea stage, simply when there's no formal organization, just somebody has an idea and a personal, a compelling passion to pursue something to fill a societal, programmatic, or cultural gap in the community. Programs are not defined. Management, it's just a core of founders or originators who are action-oriented people who have some notion of what needs to be done, but no systems in place. There's no board to speak of at this stage, only supporters who kind of agree to, if the organization gets off the ground, to put their name down as initial directors for a society. Sweat equity is the usual resource here, and systems are few and far between in an organization in this stage. The challenges here, sort of immediate steps that might need some focus, is just identifying what it is that you're trying with, that an organization, articulating, I guess, that basic reason why you're looking to found the organization, making that idea actually, so implementing that idea, developing some kind of vision, and then getting others to support the organization. So that's a quick overview of the idea stage. Startup stage, okay, now the organization is put in, they are formally registered as a nonprofit society in BC. Maybe now you've also registered with Gymnastics BC. At this point, though, programs are very experimental. You're typically responsive to any request for any type of program or any staff that come on board that have a certain type of interest. And I mean, thinking of gymnastics club, typically a head coach who's either, you know, a women's coach or a men's coach or a trampoline coach. The initial programs are probably going to be whatever that person is good at and is specialized at. Leader is a spark plug and the group's most experienced person. In terms of governance, the members here usually, you know, it's like parents of those first kids. It's somebody with a direct connection to the founder, and it's not. And at this stage, it's probably not appropriate to try to go after, you know, Jimmy Pattison to sit on the board of your organization. This is probably a bit premature. You just want people who have a personal connection to the organization and who are going to be willing to roll up their sleeves and dive in wherever necessary. I'm going to skip through this one a little bit quickly. Some of the challenges here: sharing that vision and organizational responsibility with staff, board, and constituencies, hiring versatile staff. Again, here to relate it to Tracy's example, it's probably too early at this stage to have very prescribed specific job descriptions. You're probably needing staff that are willing to do anything, that are willing to do whatever's necessary to get the organization off and running. Starting at this stage, though, to say no sometimes. I mean, organizations that are getting off the ground will respond pretty quickly to any new requests or new ideas, but at some point you have to start saying no. And then achieving that balance between the resources that you've got and what everybody wants to do in an organization at the startup stage. Okay, growth. So this is where I think there's a lot of, I mean, certainly my experience in the gymnastics world, I've had some experience with this, and I'm sure a lot of you have as well. So this is when definitely the community recognizes your organization. There's demand for your organization. You know, getting participants is not a problem. The challenge here is that the demand for your programs totally exceeds the basic infrastructure of your organization. So there's requests and wait lists for your programs, and the table legs, so to speak, the other dimensions to this model simply haven't caught up. So from a programming standpoint, your organization does understand and have defined distinctive methods and approach that make you unique, from other organizations. Management, led by people who see infinite potential, but at this stage, it's still, especially early growth stage, it's the staff that Tracy was kind of describing, folks who are doing absolutely everything under the sun to keep the organization moving forward. In the later stages of growth, you might then start to see some more specialized job descriptions. And we're going to hear from Anita along these lines, her sort of experience that'll convey what that kind of looks like. Some board structure might begin to appear, and now maybe you have parents, you know, maybe some recreational parents that are on the board, not just parents of those competitive gymnasts that started with the head coach, but maybe, you know, some board members, maybe from the broader community, but at least maybe from the different programs. Maybe there's a parent of an interclub athlete who sits on the board at this stage. So and the board maybe has started to take a more active role in recruiting other board members. However, again, in the growth stage, you really need board members that have a clear understanding of where the club is at and aren't expecting a really formalized, mature sort of governance structure. So it's important to acknowledge that and be honest with prospective board members in the same way that Tracy described being honest with prospective board members as to where her organization was at with that. Challenges here, simply too much to do and not enough time. Identifying what it is and communicating what it is that makes you unique. Developing board ownership, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later and explain what that means, so I'll table that for the moment. Starting to formalize organizational structure, and we're going to hear from Anita along these lines, what this transition that occurred in Okanagan Gymnastics. Program and strategic focus that doesn't trap creativity and vision. Having folks that are comfortable with change. Growth stage organizations experience very quick change, and that can be very uncomfortable. Tracy alluded to some of the discomfort of staff and not only the difficult situation that the club was in at the time, but also the quick changes that were being implemented. And also here, diversifying revenues and managing cash flow. So I'd like to, in this growth stage, because her experience, I think, definitely relates to this organization's in this stage, I'm going to turn it over to Anita. Hello, Anita, are you there? So hopefully Anita will be able to join us.
Hello?
Oh yeah, I can hear you, but just very faint. Let me turn up my speakers. Okay, are you there, Anita?
Yeah, can you hear me?
It's very faint, but I can. Hopefully others can hear you. I don't know if anybody wants to pop into the question box whether you can hear Anita.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes? No?
So yeah, folks are indicating they can hear you, but it's very quiet. It's quite quiet. So I don't know if you can speak very loud.
Sure, I'll try and talk a little louder.
Okay, that's a little bit better for me. So yeah, try it from there, and I'll get all the participants to turn your speakers up as loud as they go.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so a lot of what I have to share kind of stems from what Tracy shared, but we didn't go back that far. So basically, we had a lot of tension in the gym. A lot of the coaches were feeling they were not getting the support that they needed, and no one knew who they had to report to, so things were kind of going downhill a little bit. So I know we had to do something. Everyone thought the answer to this tension that was going on was because our gym was too small. So they all thought we needed a bigger gym to solve that problem. The board at that time did not feel that, but the staff was actually very adamant that this would solve everything. So the board decided to hire someone from outside to come in and review what was going on here. So the person came in, she interviewed all the key staff, asked the key questions, trying to understand what was going on in the gym. So she was asking, like, what is your role? Who do you report to? What do they feel needed improving? So from the study, it was pretty clear that the staff was not happy here. There was still tons of tension in the gym. Communication was poor. Everybody was reporting to me. And that even though that was not how it was supposed to work with our organizational chart. So, of course, with this extra workload, I was getting burned out, and we all felt that changes needed to happen. So that is when we hired another person to come on board to work with me to figure out what needed to happen. So with the board, myself, and Eve, we revamped our whole organizational chart. And so what we did is we actually got rid of the head coach of the gym position, and we incorporated head coach, team leader positions for each of the individual disciplines. So now in our organizational chart, I am the director of operations, and then Eve is our director of administration. But we both report to the board of directors. So for me, the director of operations, I am responsible for all the team leaders. So the WAG, MAG, TG, and we have ACRO. And I work very closely with each and every one of them. So I have weekly meetings with each of them, and we talk about the program. I talk about their athletes, and I get them to be invested in their athletes. I do performance evaluations and mentoring and the developing stages. So I found that this has given them more accountability, and I would follow up on stuff more, and it was a change for sure. Director of Administration, so this position was kind of taking some of my responsibilities away, which she was in charge of the office staff, fundraising, the marketing, the human resource, administration part, and the policy and procedure manual. We redid all of our job descriptions, and so all the team leaders actually have the same job description, so it's not specific to any program. The policies that we have is still a work in progress. We're working very hard with that, just updating everything, and it is a live document. Of course, it always needs to be worked on. The board of directors have been super involved with the process and have supported the changes. The challenges that we've had along the way is, of course, as Tracy was saying, change is always difficult. People resist the change, but eventually with myself working with the staff on a weekly basis to get the accountability in line and getting them responsible and doing what they love to do, which is the coaching part. Of course, they still need some support with the administration part. They had to start doing program reports to the board of directors, so every month they had to report what was going on to the board. And so acceptance was also a challenge at the beginning, but I think now we've been 1 year into this process, and I have seen very positive results. The board has seen positive results. People are much happier in here, and people are working together, and they're communicating. Mind you, communication is always an issue, so we always need to improve that, so we need to keep working on that. And once a month, we also have our team leader meetings. So that means all the team leaders come together and we talk as a group about issues in the gym overall. So that's about all I have right now. Is there anything else that...
Anita, that's terrific. You've given a lot of content, and I appreciate the. I mean, one item that leapt out at me was getting the board involved and getting acknowledging openly with across the whole team that some significant organizational restructuring had to take place. So a willingness not to sort of poke or scratch the surface of, small minor organizational tweaks, but to kind of, I mean, Tracy made the mention of standing ground and sticking to a vision. I mean, there's what you described suggests to me a strong feeling that, okay, we need some big changes, and then following through with those changes across the team. Is that kind of the case?
Yes, yeah, for sure.
And elements that you described, like those monthly team meetings, I mean, with managing any team, thinking, okay, are there practices or things that will help our team go through this transition, right? Aside from the transition itself. I have one question here. Do you have examples of how the board supported you through these changes?
Yeah, well, we had our president and our personnel committee, actually, they helped with building the new job descriptions. And then with the job descriptions, we also had to create a new wage scale. So that is the way they help, by giving their input from their outside experience. Yeah, it was just mostly meetings and extra meetings. Like last year, they spent a lot of extra time with Eve and I just to create all of this documentation that needed to happen.
Was there any significant roadblock or any point at which it was like, gosh, maybe this was the wrong decision?
Well, at the very beginning, when we had to have the individual meetings with each of the staff members and tell them what their new role was,
yeah.
A couple of coaches were kind of taken aback, but I think overall we had to, I guess, almost convince them that this is the best for the gym overall. So we had to keep explaining about the big picture.
Right.
And shift, look to the future. It's hard for some of the coaches, I think, because they don't always look at the big picture. They forget. They're just in their coaching world, and they forget to look at the big picture.
Yeah, and so allocating time to explore that and get everybody on board and to share what the big picture is. And again, I love the reference to doing that across the board and team. That's terrific, Anita. So I'm going to move on, and because I'm hopeful that you can stay on. So if there's more questions, we've got time at the end. We can go back to those. Great, Anita. So thank you. Hang on just a moment. Okay, so this next stage, maturity, this is when a club, definitely has, so Anita related this great story, significant structural changes to the management structure of the organization. The mature stage is the stage at which an organization really does have defined policies and procedures. Tracy also made mention of a pretty comprehensive policy and procedures manual. And so at this stage, the club definitely has consistent practices, consistent and widely understood systems in place for registration, for specialized job descriptions, HR policies, parent policies, volunteer policies, board code of conduct and expectations, and recruitment practices. Across the different dimensions, so programs are well organized, results focused, and in touch. Management, the executive leadership might be second or third generation at this stage from the folks who founded the organization. At this stage, the board has begun to exert a little bit more ownership over the organization. And so I mentioned earlier, touching on the notion of board ownership later on, and it's at this stage that I'm going to do that, and we'll sort of introduce Anna to the group. Early stages, I mentioned, an initial group of parents, and usually competitive parents, who are just supportive and agree with and trust a head coach or a bunch of coaches that are running programs. At some stage, though, to back up for a second, those parents, usually in those situations, especially early on in a club's history, will largely support whatever direction the head coach wants to go in. But at some stage, the board does start to exert a bit more discretion and ownership, and exert more direction over the organization. And that transition from, rubber stamp board of whatever the head coach wants to do, to a board that is a bit more involved in setting policy, to doing what Anita just described in terms of helping craft job descriptions and stuff like that, is a difficult transition. Oh, I'm trying to go, there we go. Challenges here, though, are remaining focused on clients, keeping staff motivated around the mission, building the financial footings necessary for ongoing sustainability, maintaining programmatic edge. So the challenge here for mature organizations is not becoming so locked into the way things have always been done. I think Anita made mention of that, folks, or maybe it was Tracy, referring to, well, we just do that because that's the way we do things. So not getting locked into the way things have been done in the past, just because that's the way things have been done in the past, but maintaining that notion of innovativeness, responsiveness to what the community wants. And here also, this talks about positional rather than person dependent. Idea, startup, and even early growth stage organizations are heavily dependent on the skills of the specific people that are there at the time. But at some point, formalized roles get put in place that are important for the organization, and the organization can recruit folks for those roles. So I'm now going to introduce Anna to give the perspective of the board at Delta Gymnastics and a transition that might be considered in the mature stage. Hang on, Anna, while I unmute you. And are you there, Anna? Oh, I hear something.
Hello, hello, 1, 2, 3.
Hello, Anna, we can hear you.
Okay, that's great.
Take it away.
Okay, so thanks everybody. I was very interested with everything that Tracy said, because that's kind of exactly what we've been through in the past almost 3 years. So I could relate to a lot of the points she was making. And Anita and I have been talking over the years, and Eve, about their evolution and ours. And I really like what Tracy said at the beginning about reaching out, because as Mark explained, these cycles happen over and over again. So we're not always mature. And I have to say that we've only reached maturity in the governance section very recently. I would say that we've been in decline, regrowth, revitality over and over for these last few years. So we are in a good spot right now, and I wanted to share that journey of how we made it here. And I know there's other people in attendance to this seminar that I've also reached out to, and we've shared a lot of information and supported each other over difficult times. And that's, again, another thing that I take away from Tracy, is the reaching out and trying to understand what others are going through, and help each other, because sometimes it's trial and error, and sometimes you just need that one idea that really sparks what should be your next step, your next priority. So in terms of governance, and that sort of falls into the compliance section that Tracy was talking about. When I started, most of the board had been there for a while, and there were a couple of new people. And very quickly on, I realized that there was a lot of dysfunction in that board, and I think it stemmed mainly because of their lack of trust of me as a person, because I was coming from the non-gymnastics world. I was coming as an executive director with more of a business background. And the majority of the board, or I should say all of the board, were parents. So their perspective was very inward, not very broad in terms of, and the majority of them were competitive parents at that, so even narrower in the field of the programs we offer at the gym. And as I was learning who they were and what their strengths was, I realized very quickly what the weaknesses were and what the difficulties and obstacles were. And some of those obstacles seemed pretty unsurmountable. And I have to say, I lost heart a few times over the course of the first year, thinking, why am I here? And, why am I spending my time here? So I definitely had a lot of doubt. I did reach out many, many times to my staff, because they encouraged me to stay on, and they could see there was a light at the end of the tunnel if I could just stay on. So the encouragement of the staff, I would say, is very important when you're in an executive director or club coordinator or operations role, because it's important that you know that what you're doing is for the big picture wellness of the entire organization, even though there are many obstacles along the way. So as the year progressed, I did have to say I did go a lot to Vantage Point. I did take the Executive Lab course, I took the Leaders course, I went to take the BC Societies course, I've taken how to deal with your board agenda or board meetings. I educated myself as much as I could. Whatever course they offered, I was there. And that did an immense service to myself, because then I felt I had the tools and the language that I could articulate to my staff and to the board and understand what was lacking. And not that I was totally crazy, but there actually was a problem and I wasn't imagining things. So to me, Vantage Point really opened up my eyes in terms of, there is a way, there is a solution. And Maria Turnbull at Vantage Point would, present these charts and these cycles and models, and it was like, oh, this is what it is. So it was really good to get educated. So I would really encourage people in this role to really take any kind of education or course or what you're doing right now, this webinar. It's really important to your positive outlook that there is a solution to any problem that comes across. As the year progressed and as I started taking more and more courses, one thing really clicked to me, and how to broaden the horizon of the board and break the parent being in charge of the board model. How do we do that? And actually the solution came through the course I took on the BC Societies Act. And we do have at Delta Gymnastics a parent participation model where parents have to do a certain amount, especially competitive families and interclub families have to do a certain requirement of hours. And as it happened, many of those board members were attending the board just to fulfill that parent participation requirement. They use the hours for board to claim that as time worked. Well, when I took the BC Societies Act, the lawyer that delivered that course was very, very clear, saying that board is voluntary. There should be no remuneration included. So when I brought this to the board's attention, I said, well, parent participation has a value. It has, in our case, is $15 an hour. So unfortunately, your hours from now on cannot be counted as, on the board as parent participation requirements, because it has to be voluntary and non-remunerated. So that got rid of 2 board members very quickly. So that opened up the opportunity to recruit a couple new board members. And then as the board continued to become really difficult to deal with, I started asking different people, we need to find help. We need an outside person that can come and help us to bring a broader perspective. And that's when we found our current chair. At the time, he just joined as a board member, who was a retired member of the community with a lot of governance experience. And he had just finished doing his board service with a local senior center type community organization. So he was very intrigued because he had never, thought about sport as somewhere where he could serve. But governance is governance is governance. Wherever you have a not-for-profit society, it's the exact same role that the board plays. So he was very intrigued. He met with me and he said, yeah, no, I would be very interested. And they had just developed a board orientation manual, which became the crucial document for our board to develop. So we have now adopted it and personalized it, because obviously it had all the senior center, definitions, I guess. So we just adapted it to our model. And he joined, and at first he was very quiet, and he listened to everything people were saying, and I would meet with him for support. And he said, what we need to do is just bring in more outside people. So because he was very formal, and he quickly gained the trust of the past chair, which was the big problem in our board, was our past chair. He gained his trust, and he allowed himself to be the one in charge of nominations. Then at that point we decided to formalize it, because before the board was just basically parents being asked, hey, can you come on the board? It was very informal, more like, help us out, please, we're desperate. And then it became, no, we need people with skills. So we did not only place an ad in the gym. I circulated on our website, a Facebook page, etc., for our own community of parents, but we also advertised in the local paper. And when we wrote the ad, we wrote it that we needed very specific skills. So we were looking for people with HR, with accounting, with finance, with legal, any skills that would be valuable for the board to provide guidance in the various aspects of what we do in the gym.
Anna, so, can I jump in for just a moment? I just wanted to, in my excitement, I've not even realized that we're up at 1 o'clock, but we're going to keep going. But I just wanted to address for participants, we're going to keep going until 10 after. So if folks can't keep on, this is recorded and sent out afterwards. But we are going to keep going, Anna. But I just wanted to flag for everyone that we're not going to go till 1:30 or something, but we'll give it another 10 minutes. So sorry to interrupt, Anna, but just a note in that regard. So keep going, Anna. Sorry for that.
So I'll just, sort of try to shorten the story a bit. So what the ads did is that they did attract people that normally wouldn't have applied, and one of them was one of our retired coaches, retired athlete, retired judge. So he had the skills of the sport itself. He had no board experience, but he brought to the table the knowledge of the sport itself in the various perspectives. So he became a very interesting candidate. And then and we formalized the process by having an interview with a panel of current board members. So the process has become formal. You have to apply, and there's a 2-year term to participate to a maximum of 6 years, because we feel it's very important for people to retire after a certain amount of time and allow for new blood to come in, new perspectives, new talent and skill, because there's nothing worse than having a board member sitting there for 20 years when they think that they now own the place, when in fact they're only serving the place. So we really wanted to make sure there was a limit to the amount of time a board member could stay. And then just finally, to wrap it up, it was I did attend another course at Vantage, and one of the presenters said something that really stuck with me, and he wanted to summarize what governance was all about, what the board's role was all about. And really, it's just an oversight because staff is there in place. Because we are a mature organization, we have all the specialists in place to make the society run as it should. But we do require an oversight of experts, if you will, that will make sure that we are going the right way. And the way the presenter did it is, he said, do this as a formula, like how many meetings a year do you have? Say you have 12 meetings once a year, and each meeting lasts 3 hours. So therefore, you have 36 hours a year for a group of people to come and find out or ask the questions necessary to ensure that they're steering the organization in the right direction. So 36 hours a year. That's all they have to provide their insight. They don't have time to operate. They don't have time to dig deep. They only have time to notice what's above the surface that you are presenting that they can see as a big issue or as an upcoming thing that needs to be corrected. So they're there to steer. They're not there to do. As Kana from Phoenix says, it's noses in, fingers out. And that is, to me, the most important thing that has allowed our board to now be in this mature state.
That's terrific, Anna. I can't help but I'm sitting here in shock at your outline of those initial steps, and specifically highlighting for the board. Gosh, you guys, these hours, they really don't count to fulfilling your volunteer commitment, and I'm anticipating that some participants may also be sitting here in shock, because one question I've had upon hearing that you were successful in getting board members from the community is what are those first steps? And those first, acknowledging that that's a desired path first of all, but then proceeding with those steps. Talk about a tough place to be in, and the story about, okay, so initial step, identifying that, look, this isn't going to count towards volunteer hours, and then getting a community member who then took the role of chairing a nominated committee. I mean, what a great story of specific steps that you looked to made that transition. What was, I can just imagine, a very difficult transition for the club.
Yes, it was a very difficult transition, but I think everybody's breathing a huge sigh of relief now that drama is over.
Once, if I could ask one question, once you so you had that initial member, and then now that you've got a couple more members on the board, how were those? Can you just describe some of the interactions between those community members and the board members who are parents? Any sort of examples of difficult or good conversations between them?
No, there's really good conversations, because now the parents that are there are parents. We have parents from rec, from interclub, from competitive, and 3 non-parents. So the conversations are, the whole tone of the meeting has changed. They're just there to sort of receive a wrap-up, what's going on in this area. 1 sentence, they don't dig into, why or who's doing what. They really don't care about that anymore, which sets a different tone, because now the conversation is more inclusive, it's more strategic, it's more, generating new ideas. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So the tone itself has changed, where before is they were there with a little shovel, digging, and it was like, well, you really don't need to have this information, and now they understand that.
That's terrific. So I do have a question here from Christina. She's asking, how did the club move from having organizationally involved directors to steering type directors in terms of this tone you set for staff? Bit of a difficult question. Maybe I'll pose it this way, Anna, is just so you had those members from the community join the board. Were there any structural changes to meetings, or your approach to meetings to have them noses in, hands out sort of thing?
Well, we've switched to a consent agenda model. So a lot of the items that they're expected, the expectation changed. The expectation is they have to come prepared to a meeting. If they didn't have time to read the documents that were sent ahead of them, then they can't really comment. So their only comments can come if you have done your, taken the time the night before or the morning before to read the material. Because at the meeting, the first, the minutes of the last meeting, a lot of the reports, they're just said, that was sent pre-circulated. approved or not approved. So that now takes a minute and a half if there's anything raised. And then we can just go into the discussion items. So the decision items are only brought up when there is a decision to be made, but that had been moved from a discussion item to a decision item. So 1 month we discuss, the next month we decide, and then it goes into the consent agenda. So the model of how to run the meeting is what's changed too.
That's terrific. That's absolutely terrific. Okay, we'll have a couple minutes for questions as soon as I get through these other slides. I do want to cover these last couple stages in the model, and then I'll turn it over give an opportunity for some additional questions for Anna and Anita. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these latter stages. If there is an interest here, definitely pop me an email or give me a phone call afterwards. But the main item to emphasize in the decline stage is the club here, and Anna, you mentioned actually the term on the board, being internally focused, right? And so in the decline stage, an organization, everyone in an organization is internally focused. They're no longer responsive or aware of what the community would actually like to see from them, what funders are requesting from them, what parents and kids are looking for, and they're just focused on doing things the way things have always been done. And if that continues too long, the club or organization can get into trouble. So the challenges here is to reconnect with the community, to acknowledge where the organization is at, and start discarding extra programs that others are doing maybe better than your organization, or programs that are replicated internally to the organization. Remembering not being locked in to policies, procedures, and systems. Keeping the board informed and engaged. And Anna relates this great story of an internally focused board, so we're actively reaching out to board members that are going to have their eyes looking out into the community and provide that connection with the broader community in which you're operating. Raising enough revenue. If an organization's decline stage, dropping enrollment and demand for programs is going to have financial dimensions. And organizations in this stage, especially ones that have moved from mature to decline, they'll usually be pretty top heavy in terms of budget. Turnaround, I'll just highlight here. Turnaround is a group that's openly acknowledged, explicitly acknowledged across a team that the organization is in decline and needs to do something different. And the key items here are a board team that's willing and keen and engaged and passionate about making that turnaround, but then also a key leader, like a staff leader, either a head coach, executive director, club manager, general manager, whatever, one key staff person who's going to affect that turnaround. And to be honest, affecting turnaround can entail some pretty tough decisions and throwing out a lot of items that may have been in place simply because that's the way the club has always done those items. In other not-for-profit organizations, really effective turnaround leaders tend not to be the same people that brought an organization through the startup, growth, and maturity stage. Effecting a turnaround typically has to be somebody different, for the simple reason that some very tough decisions are going to have to be made. Challenges here, so finding that champion, this first point, establishing a turnaround culture. Tracy related the story of openly acknowledging with the staff where they were at and trying to get them to move forward. But actually, she did relate the story of selective communication, I'll call it, that she was not fully transparent with everyone. So although, but she did mention that there was no elephant in the room, right? So everyone knew exactly where the club was at. That wasn't in doubt, or there weren't differences of opinion, but she chose to what extent to involve all the team members in all the nitty-gritty details. She exerted some discretion there. Having frank and open dialogue with across the team, internally and externally, and then making those tough cuts to possibly expenditures or shifting or changing programs. So terminal, this is when an organization has acknowledged or made the decision, consciously or by accident, to close their doors. Focus areas here to accept responsibility for where the organization is at and the decision to terminate. Resisting the urge to make it personal, it's no one's fault. I mentioned that there obviously is a personal dimension to everything happening in clubs, but the life cycle model is all about acknowledging where an organization is at, simply as a fact of life. Communicating those plans to everyone and doing so in a legal and honorable way. And this last point, worthy of the care in which the nonprofit was founded. So you want to acknowledge and respect the legacy that was set out at the outset. So I'm going to jump to the last slide. I already talked about the notion of board ownership. That board ownership does change over time. Initial board members can be supporters and kind of rubber stampers of the founding head coach. But at some point, there will be a bit more direction from the board. And the first instance of that is typically when the board has to select a replacement head coach or a different head coach than the founder. That can be the first big significant decision the board has to make. This is another outline of the same transition, right? Of the notion of somebody founding an organization, although they might have a board, it's really their organization, but starting to separate that out and delegate tasks, and then eventually starting to share ownership across a board and senior staff, and eventually legacy of that founding person. At that stage, ownership has been fully delegated to the folks taking over the organization. So I'm going to skip through these slides and just go to the last one with my contact information in the interests of time. Here's follow-up if you have questions or if you would like to connect with any of the presenters today. I'll just highlight, and we've got our website here, thevantagepoint.ca. We've got resources there as well. And on July 14th, another webinar brought to you on behalf of Gymnastics BC. Critical role, we're going to focus here on the role of the board chair for gymnastics clubs. Today, and I'll just emphasize, this is just a model, a diagnostic model and a vocabulary to start a conversation with your board, staff, and team, possibly volunteers and supporters, around where your organization is at, and to recognize that there's no right or wrong stage. It's just a reflection of where we are, to depersonalize those conversations, and hopefully to start some honest and frank discussions around where the organization should focus on next. And also to acknowledge difficult transitions. The stories you heard today were not easy. Tracy made the point, not an overnight process, and neither Anna or Anita's stories came across as walks in the park. Very difficult transitions. And so that's another value of this model, is giving a vocabulary for the team to acknowledge, we're in a tough place right now. We're making this jump or leap from one stage to another, and it's going to be a little bit difficult. So that concludes the webinar. I will like to I'll stay on here for a couple moments if people have questions for Anna and Anita, if they've got time to stay for maybe 2 more minutes, if any folks have specific questions to them. But definitely reach out via email, and I can connect you with I can look to answer your questions or connect you with somebody else who can. And so thank you very much for joining us, and absolutely I'll give it maybe 60 seconds to give an opportunity for any questions. Not seeing anything, I will turn back to a question that Christina had brought up previously. When is the time to do strategic planning? So her question was around strategic planning, and that could be a long answer. I'll give my take on that. Tracy brought that up, not doing strategic planning, but she also mentioned at the time not having a very engaged board, not even knowing who the board was. And so I'd suggest that the first step or indicator you look for before launching into strategic planning would be making sure you've got a committed, engaged, and passionate team of board members and also senior staff. Without that, it's not really a fruitful exercise to go through strategic planning. And one more question, Anita or Anna, I don't know if you're still with us, have either of you had your board involved in providing leads for fund development? Oh, hang on, I've got to turn their microphones on. Hang on, Anna and Anita, nobody can hear you if you're still with us.
Hello?
Yes, hello, who's that?
This is Anita. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, somebody's asking if any board members have been involved in fund development or fundraising.
Yes, we actually just started that this year, that we assigned a board member to be part of the fundraising committee. So yes. And so
that's a new thing that's just started.
Yes. Yeah.
And was that a difficult step to ask that person to do so, or did they request, or?
No, it wasn't hard. So
yeah.
I mean, she likes fundraising, so it was a good transition. But who knows what the future will hold?
You can report back next year.
Yeah, for sure.
And how about you, Anna? Any stories relating to the board's involvement in fundraising?
No, not yet. I'm not discarding the option, but they are involved in other ways. Like I forced them all to be part of our Delta Invitational
Ah,
and with an active role, which they hadn't done in the past. They had to wear their jackets, their Delta Gymnastics jackets and name tags and be an ambassador. And that was sort of a big step because they had never really embodied that role. They just come to meetings and if they have a role in the AGM, they would do a little bit, but if not, they just never represent us. So this, I think it's important for them to represent us in a way that they actually feel part of the organization, but I think the fundraising is still a ways.
and I appreciate the getting involved in a specific event. And actually, the person asking the question has qualified that, saying any board involvement in providing leads for either sponsorship or fund development. And I guess maybe that's a possibility with the Delta Invitational, or Anita, is that kind of your intent with this person that's been brought on board as the chair of this committee?
Yeah, it's just to give the board the perspective that they have some inside input as to what's going on. Because the fundraising committee kind of fell apart last year, and then it started up again, and then it fell apart. So I think what the board was looking for is just some consistency and some guidance from a board member. So far it's working, but it's only been like 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. So fresh out of the gate.
Very fresh.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much. I apologize sort of to everybody that went over time, and I say sort of because I think that was great. There were very valuable stories, a lot of learning based on the experiences that were related by Tracy, Anita, and Anna. Thank you guys so much for sharing those stories. And I think, I wrote down tons of notes of specific steps that you all put in place to walk through the transitions that you described across those different dimensions, from the governance dimension, the management dimension, and the administrative system dimension. So thank you very much, and we'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Bye for now, everyone.
Bye.